забезпечити участь і зрозумілу участь дітей у цьому заході. Тепер передаю слово Софії та Євгенію, які є адвокатами з України і представниками організації «Люмус» і спілки молоді. Вони поділяться своїм досвідом про те, як змінився доступ до освіти при війні. Не знаю, хто перший буде виступати, Софія або Євгеній.
Sophia, I'm here not only as a young person from Ukraine, but as someone who continued learning during war. When people speak about education, they often speak about curriculum, standards, or technology. But for us, education became something much simpler and much more important. It became stability. When air raid siren interrupt your lesson, you start to understand that education is not only about knowledge, it is about feeling safe enough to think about tomorrow. Sometimes learning meant sitting in a shelter. Sometimes it meant studying online without connection. And sometimes it meant simply trying to focus while being afraid. But even in those moments, education gave us something powerful, a sense that life continues. What helped the most was not only access to lessons, it was teachers who understood, spaces where we felt included, and people who listened to what children actually needed. Inclusive education is not only about access, it is about understanding different realities. Today, I am not here to say that Ukrainian children are stronger than others. I am here to say that children everywhere deserve a system that are ready before crises happen. Because children should not have only become resilient just to access education. They should simply be able to learn. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evgeny. For many of us in Ukraine, education changed overnight. Schools closed, some were damaged. Some children moved across regions or countries. And suddenly we had to learn in completely new ways. When people ask what education during war looks like, I often say it looks different every day. One day you learn online, another day you learn in a shelter. Sometimes you cannot learn at all. What I realize is that education systems are often designed for stability, but crises test whether they are truly inclusive. Children with disabilities face additional barriers. Children without parental care face additional risks. Displacement makes learning harder, but I also saw something powerful when communities, teachers and organizations work together, education become possible again. This shows that inclusive education is not only a policy, it's a cooperation. Today, I would like to invite all of us to think differently, not how to rebuild education after crisis, but how to prepare education before crisis. Because preparation protects children, and listening to children makes education stronger. Thank you.
No, okay. So
Дякуємо щиро за ваші виступи. І ми перейдемо до саме суті вашого досвіду. Зараз ми перейдемо до експертів з різних організацій. І ми будемо рухатись зліва направо. Перший доповідач – це Елая Паулеці. Вона головний фахівець щодо питань захисту освіти від атак. Ми поговоримо про дітей з інвалідністю. Дякуємо. Дякую, Філіп. І дякуємо також організаторам з боку Люмос. Також дякуємо молодим людям з України за те, що поділилися своїм досвідом сьогодні. Україна – це одна з найбільш уражених конфліктом і атаками на освіту і школу країн з 2022 року. Багато освітніх закладів було розрушено. На жаль, цей досвід, який ми маємо, заставляє нас подивитися під іншим кутом на освіту. І, на жаль, освіта в таких умовах стає нормальністю. Різні країни, як Україна, Ефіопія, Палестина, Судан і багато інших стикаються з такими проблемами. Згідно зі звітами про конфлікти, більшість атаки на школи стають дебільші. Коли діти та учні з інвалідністю стають жертвами, ми питаємо себе, де цей баланс? Освіта не має бути полем бою. Нещодавні факти з Лівану свідчать про саме таку ситуацію. Школи, де навчалися діти з обмеженими можливостями, були зруйновані. Були також Ізраїлю були видані рекомендації про те, щоб під час атак освітні заклади не підлягали, не були мішенню. Глобальна коаліція по захисту освітніх закладів показує, що коли відбувається руйнація шкіл, дуже часто доступ до освіти не відновлюється. В той самий час використання вибухової зброї підвищує кількість дітей, які стають інвалідами. І це збільшує навантаження вже на достатньо вразливу систему освіти. І багато дітей, які переживають атаки на школу, потім не можуть повернутися до навчального процесу. І це порушує повернення до інклюзії дітей в освіту. Цього ранку ми чули, що діти мають мати повне право доступу до освіти, незважаючи на те, чи є у них будь-які обмеження фізичні або ні. Це їх право, яке гарантовано, і це не має бути якимось виключенням. Закон про права людей діє і під час збройних конфліктів. Доступ до освіти не має зупинятися, коли починається війна. Інклюзивна освіта має бути частиною гуманітарного закону. Однак залишаються все ж таки розриви в доступі до освіти. Тому коаліція розробила новий практичний інструмент, чек-ліст, який дивиться на те, чи відповідає національне законодавство тому, щоб забезпечити доступ до освіти. Такий закон має відноситися сильні міжнародні закони мають захищати доступ до освіти. Також існує декларація, яка закликає мати повний доступ до освіти. Доступ дітей з обмеженими можливостями до освіти має бути забезпечений. Всім дітям має бути забезпечений доступ до імплементації своїх прав на освіту. Ми закликаємо держави дотримуватися міжнародних норм без подвійних стандартів та виключень і попереджати і робити неможливими атаки на освітні заклади під час конфліктів. Дякуємо.
the documentation that you referred to will be accessible. You want to say just a few words?
Yes, sure. The new edition of the Education Under Attack report of the coalition will be published in June this year.
So thank you, or I don't know if I should thank you, but for bringing this stark information. And obviously the Safe Schools Declaration is a central document on this issue. And just signing it is really not the most helpful action. It's really an implementation. I would like to move on to Federica Settimi, who is Senior Inclusive Education Policy, Advocacy and Programs Manager at Inclusion International. And here also we have a new guidance tool that you're going to be telling us about. And I'm personally quite excited about the details. Federica.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. It is a real pleasure and an honor to be here and to join these distinguished speakers, especially the children who bring lived experience to the table and ground us. And thank you also to Lumos, to the organizers, for organizing this event. As we hear, for a child whose world has been turned upside down by violence or displacement, inclusive education is a lifeline. In the midst of chaos, a classroom can really provide protection and a safe space during chaos and difficult times. Inclusion International is the global network of persons with intellectual disabilities and their families. We are spread across 140 countries, and our families are really involved in pushing inclusive education in emergencies. Because we know that children with disabilities are too often left behind in these emergency settings, facing multiple and intersecting barriers. To address this, Inclusion International, together with the International Disability Alliance, ASDAN Colombia, and la Fédération Nigérienne des Personnes Handicapées, have implemented a project in Niger and Colombia supported by Education Cannot Wait. Our core mission in these countries has been to bridge the gap between humanitarian agencies and organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs. We believe that to make education in emergencies truly safe and inclusive, OPDs, organizations of persons with disabilities, and their families must be recognized not as just aid recipient, but as expert partners in the design, delivery of that aid, including when it comes to education in emergencies. A major focus of our work has been translating this on-the-ground experience into practical, accessible tools that the humanitarian actors, OPDs, can use and scale. Today, I want to share a brief update of the different resources that are already available and that are going to be available within the next month. We have already published dedicated learning tools specifically designed for organizations of persons with disabilities to navigate the international standards that shape inclusive education in emergencies. This interactive tool supports them to identify implementation gaps and advise on building equitable education systems for all children. We also have finalized a series of training methodologies for both teachers focusing on inclusive pedagogies and also for families focusing on advocacy for inclusive education in emergencies. So I really invite you to approach us to get to these, to use these training methodologies because we've had overwhelming great feedback from teachers who are much more confident now to support children in emergencies. We have worked also on a first case study documenting how an organization of persons with disabilities in Colombia successfully established long-term collaborations with the multi-year resilience program of Education Cannot Wait, and are now having much stronger role in the collaboration to shape inclusion in emergencies. As we near the end of this very project, we are launching more tools next month. By April, we will be releasing a series of foundational global public goods, including an evidence-based report built directly from interviews and data collected from children with disabilities and their parents. In Colombia and Niger, this report gives a very detailed picture of what the reality in education in emergencies is like for children with disabilities and their families in 4 regions in Colombia and 4 regions in Niger. There's also an interactive barriers toolkit that will help humanitarian actors and OPDs actively identify and remove the physical, communication, and environmental barriers that keep children out of school. There is also the Unlocking Inclusive Education in Emergencies learning tool. This is also an interactive tool specifically built for humanitarian actors, helping them apply the inclusive education principles directly in the field operations without losing a lot of time on theoretical and international legal discussions. So we will also publish a series of in-depth case studies from both countries, showcasing exactly how OPD-led data led by organizations of persons with disabilities, data collection and joint coordination platforms work in practice so that organizations can replicate these successful models globally. These upcoming tools are designed to support partners about advanced inclusive education in emergencies to reach every child. So we looked at multiple types of partners. So please stay tuned, reach out. We look forward to sharing these resources with you in the future and to connect and work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Federica. And I have a few questions for the discussion, unless the floor will take that time up. So I have them written down, so be prepared. Zoe Bertrand is our last expert here, Senior Advocacy and Policy Officer at the Global Survivors Fund. And she will talk to us about trauma-informed education, in particular with regard to Boko Haram survivors in Nigeria. So Zoe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank the organizer for this important meeting and the two young panelists for their presentation. So indeed, I will focus my remark on education as a form of reparation for children affected by conflict. Just to start with a short introduction, the Global Survivors Fund was created by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Dr. Denis Mukwege and Nadia Mourad to enhance reparation for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. For us, reparation for children is an absolute priority. As we know, children who are victims of grave human rights violations, violations of international humanitarian law have a right to reparation. This is well recognized under international law. Just to make clear for everyone, reparations are measures aimed to repair the harms caused by violence. They can take many forms. It can be education, it can be social support, psychological support, financial assistance, or just access to services to really help victims rebuild their lives. But how can we provide reparation for children? As we have heard this morning from the young representative in the main panel from Colombia, conflict is one of the biggest factors disrupting education. For children affected by conflict-related sexual violence, it's even worse. Many have dropped out because of the stigma, of the fact that they are bullied at school. They have fear of school. Some live with serious psychological and physical consequences of the violence they have experienced. Others are just returning from captivity and with many years without schooling, so they have difficulties to re-enter the formal education system because their age no longer match their educational grade. So as a result, many of these children are excluded from education, which further deepens the harm they have already experienced. This is why at GSF, we really believe that education itself can and must be a form of reparation. For this, it requires more than just simply allowing children to return to school. It requires more than just a right to education. For this, education must be designed in a certain way to really repair the harm caused by conflicts. So this means basically three things: quality education with trauma-responsive pedagogy, flexible education with accelerated learning, learning on the go, or non-formal learning to really meet the needs of children wherever they are, and inclusive and accessible education that was mentioned by Yevgeny and Sophia, for instance, with financial support, social support to really allow children to access education. An example of this approach that I would like to showcase today is the work we do at GSF with the NIM Foundation in Nigeria. We support girls affected by the Boko Haram insurgency to return to school in a specific school called the Lafia Sahari School. This school really offers a flexible, trauma-responsive education model for children who have experienced a conflict. So one of the key principles of the model followed by this school is flexibility. So many children who return from Boko Haram captivity have missed years of schooling. So instead of a rigid yearly academic achievement requirement and assessment, their progress is measured over a course of 6 years. So that really allows them to learn at their own pace, to gradually rebuild their confidence and their skills. The curriculum is also designed differently. It is value-based, which means that it's centered on values such as peace, integrity, respect. So children who have lost their moral reference point during the conflict, we learn empathy, trust, and a sense of belonging. In addition to financial support that we provide, students also receive psychological and medical support. Teachers are trained in trauma-sensitive education. They are also trained to recognize trauma and address it. And this is really an essential part of enabling children to return to education in and after conflict. This school is not only a place for individual learning, it also serves as a space for community reconciliation. So pupils families, and former insurgents are brought together in the school to share their experience, express their grievance, and begin rebuilding trust within the community. The idea is really for the school to become a place of recovery and belonging. This experience in Nigeria really shows that education-focused reparation and trauma-responsive education is not only possible, but it's transformative. It's only one example, but it really shows what we can achieve. And so in the coming years, we will try to build on the experience and make education-focused reparation a reality for thousands of children. Reparation is a responsibility of states under international law. So our main call for government is to establish reparation programs that includes reparation measures focused on education, but trauma-responsive education. It's a strategic investment in the future. By helping children regain stability, skills, and opportunity, education as reparation can strengthen social cohesion and contribute to the long-term recovery of societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And it's a lot of information to digest and also triggers a few questions. But at this point, I want to come back to the stars of our side event, the two young persons, Sophia and Yevgeny, who have, as I understand it, some questions to put to the experts and put them on the grill with some pointed questions. Sophia, you want to start?
Education give you during a difficult period?
The panelists are requested to answer that. What has education given you during a difficult period of your lives? Who would like to start? Zoe.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you very much, Sophia, for your question. Education gave me personally a safe space, and I think that's how education should be designed. We must fight against stigma in school, bullying in school, and really make schools safe spaces. That means protecting education from attacks in conflict, for instance, but it also means schools that are safe within the school, between children themselves, between the interaction between teachers and children. So really making education safe is actually multidimensional. Yeah.
I think education gave me the feeling of belonging. And it is difficult to sometimes think about feeling you belong in a situation of displacement, but or just in usual times, even without the crisis ongoing, if children with disabilities sometimes don't feel that they belong because the system is not truly inclusive. So in education should make sure that it really gives this feeling that every child belongs in school, just like everyone else at any time.
I want to echo what you shared earlier about education giving a sense of stability, the stability that every child, no matter whether during armed conflict or not, but I guess especially during armed conflict, needs. I was privileged of not experience armed conflict during my childhood, but nevertheless, I realized how stability and daily routine and safe framework, personal frame is, supporting the children's rights to development. So, yeah.
So, next question.
What barrier in the education was the most unexpected?
Did everyone get the question? What was the most unexpected barrier to learning? Is that the
What was the most unexpected barrier to learning?
panelists? What was your most unexpected? So what was your most unexpected barrier to learning for you personally? Tough questions, come on, guys. I'll tell you what mine was. It was a school system and teachers that didn't care enough about the students and pupils. And that really was a demotivating factor. And so I just want to underscore how important good teachers and professionals are in terms of creating purpose and motivation, regardless of the circumstances, even when you're endowed with good conditions and material infrastructure. So, panel.
For me personally, it was bullying, which was just so widespread. But at that time, we weren't even acknowledging, we weren't really talking about it. Some years ago, there was much less awareness. And so that was my personal, whether it was direct to me or it was an unexpected barrier.
To me, it was that sometimes the teaching methodologies are one size fits all. So, in some education system, this is really a rigid system, and the curriculum is something that has to be followed. Instead, if we look at learning styles instead of teaching in only one way, we could accommodate more learners and make education better for all children.
Yes, I don't want to repeat what you have all said, but it probably be the lack of individual support. Children are taken as a group without identifying the needs of each one of the pupils, and that sometimes is a strong barriers to learning. So I think it also meets, it's also what you've mentioned, both of you earlier, about inclusivity. To be truly inclusive, we must acknowledge the differences and the individual challenges faced by every children.
Can I redirect you to read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Émile, and on education, which was How to Customize Education to Individual Children. So the groundbreaking book a few centuries ago, which we're still trying to implement in a meaningful manner. Yevgeny, you have another question, or Sophia?
I think we should ask you the question. No, I think that also joins what we have just mentioned. I think adults have difficulties to first to identify the concrete barriers children face, but the true thing is that we identify through what we have lived through, but I think everything has changed for the past probably 20 years. Especially with social media and the use of internet. And I think that's something that us adults have difficulties to really understand. Online bullying, harassment, and the power and the impact of social media on children nowadays.
I think, it will be really important to establish systems to listen to what children have to say on a regular basis. Families too, because families also play a role in supporting their children, but definitely their views should be listened to only once also the children is has been heard. So I totally I agree on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to reply, but also share, that I really think that there is very little to misunderstand, and that the message from children and the evidence coming out of, research, and it's so clear, what we hear, it's not possible to be misunderstood. Children demand education to continue during armed conflict, especially during emergency. This is a clear message that no adults can misunderstand. And so I really want to raise the flag here and saying, we should call out this more. There is evidence that education is life-saving, that protection of education means prevention of other grave violations against children, including children with disabilities, prevention of international core crimes, and yet we are still misunderstanding children. We're still trying to avoid and come up with justification for cutting more and more fundings to education in emergencies. How dare adults do that?
Thank you, panelists. I would like to add to that because we keep using the phrase, the word education, and indeed it is the key word in all of this, but education is much more than formal learning. When you put children in a class, it's also their right to leisure and play and being together and harmonious development and all kinds of other stimulations that are not just acquisition of cognitive competencies or knowledge. So, and just being children together, that is such an important element. And being away from the anxiety of parents in conflict situations. I mean, one of the most difficult things, and here we have many specialists, of course, and in the room as well, is that children are contaminated by the anxiety and worry that the adults who are best persons to protect them are themselves worried. And so it really is a multiplier of and school is a protective membrane in many ways, or some sort of formal education setting. So I don't want to take up too much time. We have some really great people in the room that I know, recognize, and I'm sure even the ones I don't have some good questions. And what I would like to ask you is if you could direct most of the questions to our young people, because we want to benefit from their reactions as well. Sir, and please introduce yourself when you.
Yes. Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed Serkal. I'm the director for advocacy group, and I'm based in the MENA region and just came back from Beirut when the bombing started. And I would like to give my respect to Sofia and her colleague Ardini for being courageous and to be here with us. And I think, unfortunately, conflict has made them mature to come and stand and give the statement. My question to them or to your distinguished colleagues, on the panel. Yes, we are facing so many attacks on school, education, and this is rooted from the hate of the enemy toward eliminating education for the students. So my question to them is, what do you expect from the UN to do to prevent further attacks? Do we criminalize attacks on school like we criminalize attacks on heritage and historical site? This is my question because I'm seeing the attacks continue, the 180 in Iran, and I've seen the schools being bombed now in Lebanon, and also in my country, in Iraq. I've seen so many schools being bombed during the war with the US, or the US war on Iraq, and it will continue. Well, we see that in Palestine, and on and on and on. It just rooted on the hate by the enemy. So this is my question, Tim. What do you expect from the UN to do to help you and to protect your future? Thank you.
I want to give some time for the panelists to think it through. And if there's a second question in the meantime, and then we'll come back to your question for an answer. I see a hand way in the back. Would you like to take the floor? And introduce yourself, don't forget.
Thank you, Chair. I am from Kashmir. I present International Muslim Women's Union in UN. I just want to raise two questions because you repeatedly said in the conflict areas like Ukraine, like others. I also belong to a conflict zone, Kashmir, and according to the BBC, that 39% education institutions are under threat because they were captured by the Indian Army to use as their bunkers. 8.3% students are mentally disturbed, and 1.5 million Kashmiri children are not going to school in the both parts, Indian occupied Kashmir, Pakistan administered Kashmir. Because of the bombing and shelling on the LOC, they are not supposed to go to the school, and therefore they are facing huge mental stress. Now, the second question for the panelists is that who is bearing this? It is the mother of the child. She tries her best to send the child to the school, but there are no ways and means. As said by Mustafa, that what is the role of UN? Our conflict is UN recognized, but all the humanitarian agencies are not allowed. Even Amnesty International, Save the Children, they were working with the student children, the small children in the schools, but they were not allowed to continue their work, and India stopped the offices, and there is nobody to go and help the mother and the child to have a very systematic school system. Another question is that India is using pellet lethal weapons, and 1,400 Kashmiri boys and girls, age 8 months and 12 years, lost their both eyes, and they were not allowed to get the medical aid from outside India because they didn't get the travel documents. What about their education? They are a burden for the mother because father is not in home, he's in the jail. What can we do? What you suggest? And I am surprised that young students from Ukraine and other parts are fighting for the education. But those who have no way to come here, how can we fight for them? Thank you very much.
So there were many questions in here, but there are two core that the first is what can the UN do and what are you expecting the United Nations to do? But if you could broaden that to what other organizations can do, including civil society. And the second question, which I picked up, is what about accountability? I mean, there are violations and very serious violations. We heard about what happened in Iran. We hear what's happening in the Kashmir region and elsewhere in Lebanon. Okay, so it happens. The violations occur. What next for those children who have been affected? So anyone like to pick up on that, including Sophia? But any of any? But if not, we can, let me see. Yeah? Okay.
I would like to answer the question of Mohammed as to UN protection. I think first is apply particular effects on the countries who are responsible, who are taking the opportunities of education access. And the second is they should think how to help the teachers. and organizations who are responsible to provide the access, how to help them to provide this access and to think together in this direction. This is my opinion. This is my point of view.
Does Sophia want to add something? Do the panelists want to add something? Please, Ilaria.
Thank you very much for the very relevant comments. Maybe just to flag that, first of all, the situation in Kashmir will surely be, you will find data on attacks on education in the upcoming report that I mentioned earlier, Education Under Attack. We will publish it around June, and this is the coalition's flagship report that is published every 2 years and really includes all the documented attacks on education for the period. This edition will cover 2024-2025. So the escalation there will be reflected in the report. And also thanks for your relevant comments. And I can speak on behalf of the JCPA, of course, and in relation to what we expect from the UN, in relation to these increasing attacks in context of increasing escalation, and what we expect is more and more, on one hand, calling out the perpetrators even further, and really challenging what we hear often about, the fact that attacks on schools and educational facilities can be lawful, and the lex specialis takes precedent over international human rights law. We need to challenge it. The UN needs to address this more and more, and we welcomed very much the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to do education work in 2025, which really helped strengthening the international standards on this, on the prohibition of military use. What we know is that oftentimes attacks on schools are not even, properly prosecuted because of military use issue. So, and by the way, last year the coalition published a new guide on accountability for education-related crimes to really shed light on this widespread impunity that relates to this. So we look forward to collaborating on this matter.
Yeah, can I echo that? I think that there's a whole body, as you put it, of information around this, but it feels as if a lot of impunity goes on. And I just want to also draw your attention to the fact that the committee and a large ecosystem around child rights are working on General Comment 27 on access to justice. And so, again, when violations occur, there have to be means for children to access justice. There will be nothing in there that automatically brings prosecution or condemnation for violations, but it's a roadmap for states to take into account on how to act when there are violations that are claimed, and certainly the ones that we have been talking about today. And also, actually, the full title of the general comment is access to justice and effective remedies. So we have to think about remedies also, not only providing education as catch-up, but other forms of redress that can be financial, that can be also criminal pursuit, and so on and so forth. But again, it's only a roadmap, and we, like the Safe School Declaration, needs states to put their political will at work. I don't want to steal, if anyone on the panel wants to briefly say something. Thanks, Zoe. And then one more question from the floor.
No, I think you replied very eloquently to the question, but just to complement, when we think about what the UN can do, I think that the UN is mostly its member states. And so the responsibility in the end really lies within its member states. The UN has produced now quite a body of norms regarding attacks on education, and it now relies with member states to implement those. And it's what, as was mentioned this morning by the representative from the ICRC, it's time to move from text to implementation. And I think that's really key now. It's, yeah, my main message.
Thank you very much. And as always, it happens with these panels, we want to cram as much as we can into the final minutes. So I see one more question, but it really has to be very brief, or else I cut you off.
I don't mind of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. I would like to know that this is a very general question about education. How does a student or a learner know that the curriculum that it gets is complete in the sense that they are given all the information they need to get in order to come to relevant conclusions about the subject they're learning? In fact, how do the curriculum providers know that their curricula are like that? Thank you.
So it's a really important question, but indeed it is a little bit broad to answer in just a few seconds, even for our colleagues here, unless one of you very briefly wants to share.
Just to flag that there is a report that is going to be published by the Special Rapporteur on Education on assessment, curriculum assessment. So I think she would probably address that question in this report.
Thank you very much. Federica, we have to move on, and Lucy has some final remarks, and then we have to close. I'm sorry to be the guardian of time here.
Thank you, Philip. And I want to say what a privilege it's been on behalf of Lumos to convene the discussion today. At Lumos, we firmly believe in the interconnectedness of children's rights, and we know that inclusive education is essential to achieving our core mission, which is the reform of children's care and protection systems and the end of institutionalization. Access to inclusive education systems, including in an armed conflict, is a family strengthening intervention on top of everything we've heard today, and it reduces the risk of unnecessary separation of children and families. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists, and in particular to Sophia and Yevgeny, in particular for reminding us through their questions that everyone in this room, no matter what state or organization we represent, is a person who had a childhood and an education of their own. And as the representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross stated an hour ago on this morning's panel, we must think of what education has done for us and for the children that we know when we're thinking about the provision of education in conflict zones. Sophia and Yevgeny are part of our youth advisory boards in Ukraine as Lumos, and we know that involving children and young people in decision-making is one method on top of all of those we've heard, which ensures meaningful access to education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and sorry to rush you. And we, out of courtesy for the next panel, we have to move out as fast as possible so that they can gain a couple of minutes. Thank you all for your attendance, and have a good rest of the day.